Carrie. Hey, Carrie.
Hey, Carrie.
How are you guys? Happy Friday.
Happy Friday. Happy lunar eclipse.
I love it.
Right?
I'm so curious. I was like, I'm in when I saw Sonja's post.
Yay.
There's Sheila.
There's Sheila.
Hi, everyone.
Hello.
Hey.
Hi, Sheila. How's it going?
Good.
Good. Are you in private mode today?
I am. I just
Okay.
got out of the shower. I worked in my pajamas, then took a shower.
I get it.
You
It's
do
that
you,
kind of a
Sheila.
day.
You do you.
If I wasn't doing this, I'd still be in my PJs too. It's the lunar eclipse day, so we're all feeling a bit eclipsed.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right.
I got up and saw, I forgot to set my alarm, but I woke up at 4, so I got up and I saw the second half. Because I'm on the East Coast.
Oh, you did.
Yeah.
I completely missed it.
Good for you. Good for you. I did not. I was like, I'm not.
Sure did.
Hello,
It's a party now.
darling.
It's a party now.
It's a party.
Officially, it's a party. Very good.
I want to dance with somebody.
There's
Zach!
Excellent. Hey, Zach.
Hello.
See you. Thanks for joining.
Yes.
Right. Excellent. Well, I guess let's get started. And then if people join, if people keep joining, they just, join whenever. So what I wanted to start out with was, since it's the day of the eclipse today, I wanted to start out with us just really grounding in our bodies. So I was thinking, let's take a deep breath together and just help ourselves take all this energy that's coming through right now and ground it into our heart, into our solar plexus, into our groin, wherever it needs to go, right? Let's just ground all that energy. All right. So let's take a deep breath. Beautiful. If anybody wants to do a sigh, that's usually a good one as well, that just allow the energy to flow through. All right. Very nice. So thank you so much for being here with me today for our first star hour. And yeah, for those of you who don't know me very well, some of you know me very well and some of you don't know me so well. So I just wanted to say a couple of things. One, I'm originally from Austria, from Vienna. And so English is not my first language, which you may have discovered already. You may know this from just listening to me. Be like, yeah, that girl has an accent. I can hear it. So sometimes I will say things in a funny way, or I will use words that don't exist. Rarely, but it will happen. So forgive that if that does happen today. Also, because of the eclipse, I've been feeling a little bit under the weather since last weekend. So my nose is just a little runny, so I might have to once in a while take my tissue out. So I just wanted to share that as well, just for transparency's sake. And then, yeah, I've been doing astrology since the early 90s. Studying it and engaging with it and being passionate about it. And I started my astrology website in 2010. So I've been doing that now since, is it 15 years? Is that 15 years? Yes, 15 years. Oh my God. Okay. So it's been a minute. But yeah, it's just sort of unfolded and developed and I've also incorporated life coaching with it. So basically, that's kind of what I do. I do astrology readings. I do the life coaching. I combine the two. So just to support people with understanding themselves a little bit better and supporting them and allowing them to move forward in their lives, whatever path they're on. right? Okay, so that's the little bit about me. And then I just have a couple of guidelines for today, which are just two, basically. The one is what I can do, which is I can answer all of your beautiful questions about astrology or anything else that you want to know, if I can answer it. And then what I can't do is I cannot pull up somebody's chart, birth chart, because there's just not, it would take too long, basically, to do that. Because it requires me opening up my computer program and putting in information, so it takes quite a while. But that said, even though I can't pull up your birth chart, if you know your own sun sign, moon sign, rising sign, Venus, Mars, whatever it is that you know about your chart, and even if you don't know any of it, you still would know your sun sign, right? Whatever you know, I'm happy to answer questions about that if you know what it is. Or if something requires for me to pull up a chart, then I would just ask you to do a reading with me. That way I can fully spend my concentration on you and your chart and help you out big time. All right. All right. So these are just the guidelines. Are there any other guidelines, Brian, that I need to adhere to? Nothing. We're going to be here together until 1 o'clock, if that works for everybody. All right. Okay, so, and then I thought I get started maybe with just saying a couple things about astrology before we start to take questions. Just so you guys also understand where I'm coming from with the kind of astrology that I teach and that I read for people. So the astrology that I teach or read, I call it soul-based astrology. And the reason why it's soul-based is because I should go into the speaker view, shouldn't I? Yeah. Sorry, guys. Here we go. Is that better? I forgot about that. The kind of astrology that I teach and that I read for people is called soul-based astrology. And the reason why it's called that is because I use astrology from the perspective of our soul. And so basically, the belief system that I come from is that we all choose our own birth charts as we come into the physical body, into the human existence. From a soul's perspective, the chart that we're choosing, the moment of time that we're born and the moment of time that we're choosing to be born and the place is, energetically speaking, just right for the kind of things that we want to do in this lifetime in terms of our agenda, in terms of our needs to evolve as a soul. And therefore, the chart itself gives us all the information we need to know to help you understand what it is that you came in here for in terms of your soul purpose, your soul journey, what it is that you wanted to accomplish, as a soul. And so the reason why I love that perspective is because from the human perspective, it can be really hard sometimes to understand why we choose certain things or why certain things are happening in our lives. But from a soul perspective, we can kind of zoom out a little bit and we can go, oh, okay. So from a soul perspective, that actually makes sense. And this is why I'm here and this is what I'm trying to do. And that can be extremely helpful, just zooming out and getting a little bit more of an understanding of, our own chart, our own life, our own circumstances, things that we're dealing with, because everyone is dealing with something as a human being, right? Because that's why we're here. Otherwise, why would we be here, right? That the whole purpose of being human is that we're learning something, that we're growing, that we're evolving. And if we were already perfect and if we all had it all figured out, we wouldn't need to be here, right? So that's I just wanted to share that. And does that make sense, what I'm sharing so far in terms of the kind of astrology that I'm teaching? Is that understandable, everybody? Is there like a chat function here as well, Brian? I think there is, right? So you can either share with your chat or you can unmute yourself and share via the microphone if you want to say something. When I'm asking questions, that's totally fine, by the way. Thanks, Carrie. Okay. Yes. All right. Sheila, did you want to say something?
Oh.
Yes, very understandable. Okay. Beautiful. All right. So, okay. Let me just go back so I can see your chat stuff. Okay. So the other thing I wanted to share was what astrology is not. Okay. And this is important because a lot of people sometimes they come at they think of astrology as something that tells you the future. They think of it as something that solves your problems in your life. This is not what astrology is there for. Astrology is a tool, from my perspective, it's a tool that supports us in understanding ourselves better, in understanding the energy patterns better that are currently going on. But everyone has free will. Astrology is not going to tell you what your future is going to be like because you are creating your own future, as you all know, of course. And astrology is not going to take away your problems because whatever you're experiencing in life is there for a reason and is there for you to evolve and grow. So astrology can only help you with understanding that part and using the energies that are in place in connection with your own chart to help you up level, so to speak, right? To go to a higher vibrational place and understand what's currently going on in your life from a higher vibrational place. And therefore, you might be able to handle life situations differently or better. So that's what astrology is and what it's not. And then I was just wondering, just to put the question out there to you guys, can you think of anything in terms of astrology where you feel like there are some misconceptions in connection with astrology, things that you've heard people say, or things that you've read, or things that you've thought yourself about astrology, where you've been like, this is what astrology is, or where you've been like, is that really what astrology is about? Like, is there anything that you might think about misconceptions about astrology?
I think for me is really how do you read your astrological chart when you see it in like different locations. Like I feel like it's always your sun sign. So how do you incorporate your rising and your moon, and how important is that?
Great question. Thanks, Carrie. Yes. So obviously the sun sign is the sign that oftentimes is being used in mainstream astrology when we're looking at horoscopes in newspapers or online, or when people talk about the sun sign astrology. That's very often what comes up because it's an easy way to talk about one thing and to support people just by focusing on that sun sign, right? Astrology is extremely complex, and therefore you will find that in mainstream astrology, you will not find that complexity because it's just too much to incorporate, and people wouldn't be able to do that for the general public, right? So that it's, one shoe fits all type of philosophy, right? In order to incorporate more than just the sun sign, it is important to really, first of all, to know your chart a little bit better, to know what is your rising sign, what is your moon sign, where is your Venus, where is your Mars, right? These are things that might be really helpful to know. And the way to incorporate is the rising sign. You can, when you read horoscopes that are generally speaking written for sun signs, one thing you can do is also read your ascendant sign as well as your sun sign, especially if you have your ascendant sign and your sun sign in an early degree of that sign. So what I mean by that is, so if you're born at the beginning of Taurus, for example, like in late April, right? If you're born in late April and your sun is at the 0 degrees of Taurus or 5 degrees of Taurus, like at the very early, the first decade of Taurus, right? Then you would definitely read sun sign Taurus. And if you have an ascendant that's in that early degree of Taurus as well, which you would have to know your chart in order to see that, then you can also read for the ascendant sign. If your ascendant is, let's say, in 0 degrees of Scorpio, in an early degree of Scorpio, you could read Taurus and Scorpio. Does that answer your question a little bit, Carrie?
Yes. So it sounds like you would read your rising and your sun and not necessarily your moon.
Not for general
Yeah.
horoscopes.
Okay.
General horoscopes, they are written for sun sign astrology in connection with the houses, with the 12 houses that the chart has. And therefore, it works best for the sun sign and for the rising sign.
Okay. That's helpful.
Yeah. What you can do, however, if you want to know a little bit about your moon sign, for example, I would say look up, there are astrology websites out there. You can look up what does the moon in, what sign is your moon in, Carrie?
Yeah. It's Taurus.
Oh, Taurus. Okay.
Yeah.
So, that's funny. So if your moon is in Taurus, you can read about what does moon in Taurus represent. Now, if you are a member of my online community, for example, I would be writing about the moon in Taurus every 28 days because that's how often the moon is in Taurus, every 28 days. So you can read on my online community, you can read when the moon's in Taurus, what that means. And so that would resonate with you personally even stronger because you have the moon in Taurus. But there are also online websites where people talk about, the moon in different signs, or where you could also read about that. That way you get a bit of an understanding of your own emotional conditioning and how you respond or react emotionally to life.
Mm-hmm.
So the moon in Taurus, for example, is a very down to earth, very grounded energy. And it's actually a nice place to have the moon in because you don't get too easily, uncentered, emotionally disjointed. When you have the moon in Taurus, you're pretty grounded because it's a grounded sign. However, when you feel in the corner, when somebody pushes you in a corner, right? Or when you feel like you have no way out, the moon in Taurus will come charging forward. It will be like, like, leave me alone, go away, right? Like you will become quite, but it takes a lot to push a moon in Taurus in that place. Like you can be very, very patient. Is that true for you, Carrie?
Yeah, absolutely. That resonates.
Yeah. So oftentimes, and that's your emotional conditioning because that's what you experienced growing up in your family worked. It was something that was sort of like maybe something that you got from your mother or something you got from your relationship with your mom or from your upbringing in general. There was this sense of like, just feeling kind of everything felt quite stable and quite, emotionally stable at least.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
No, that's great. And that's super helpful because I think even though like I know my rising moon and sun, I'm like, when do I use it? How do I use them? So that's really helpful.
Yeah. So if you want to connect to your sun sign and your ascendant in terms of what's going on energetically speaking by transits, then of course you need to know what the transits are and how that impacts you. And that you could either do, by looking at the astrology as it happens every day, which I write about every day on my website, or you can also, if you just go to mainstream horoscopes, right? Mainstream horoscopes, they will resonate. Again, if you have an early degree sun sign in a sign and an early degree rising sign in a sign. If you have a late degree, so for those of you who know the degrees of the signs in your chart, like I have a 29 degree Libra rising. So if I read the horoscope about Libra, it will probably not resonate because my 29 degree is the last degree of Libra. So it's very close to Scorpio. But if I read the Scorpio horoscope, it would resonate a lot more. And again, it also depends on who writes the horoscope, right? Because some people are better at these things than others. One of the misconceptions actually that I can talk about with astrology is that, everyone thinks that astrology is just exactly the same, no matter which person is presenting it and which person is talking about astrology. And I would say that is not true. In my experience, having, been around other astrologers for 35 years and having studied it and having, taught it and learned a lot about it, I would say that there are astrologers that will resonate with you more than others. And that also depends on your own personality and your own understanding of astrology. Me personally, I resonate with astrologers who have more of a wider perspective and more of a soul-based perspective. I think in astrology they call it evolutionary astrology. That's the sort of the direction that I prefer. And I would also say, even within that direction, there are some astrologers who just, depending on their own filters, right? Every person has their own filters that they look through when they deal with that tool, because astrology is just a tool. And so each person that teaches or that writes something about astrology, they're always looking through their own filters, their own conditioning, their own understanding of life, their own needs and wants and preferences and everything. So that's also the reason why some people will resonate more with you than other people. And yeah, so you want to be just more careful what you're listening to and who you're listening to, in terms of like, does it truly resonate? Don't take it by face value. Just check in with your heart. Like, is this actually resonating with what this person is saying? Does it resonate with you in terms of like, does it uplift you, or does it drag you down? If astrologers make you feel scared and afraid of life, then you might not want to listen to them, because that's a person who comes from a filter that's very dense and that's very that's not life affirming. And any tool that's being used in a way that is not life affirming is not, that person is not using that tool to their highest ability, if that makes sense, right? So I would always recommend check in with your heart and check in with what resonates with you. All right, so let's go to questions. Feel free to ask away. I'm happy to answer anything and everything. Janice.
So my question has to do with eclipses. I have a very, very, very light understanding of what eclipse energy does, but would you talk a little bit more about just what that is and what that means, kind of very generically?
Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks
Thank
for that
you.
question. That's excellent and very apropos. So yes, eclipses are powerful new moons and full moons. So new moons and full moons happen every month, but eclipses only happen every twice a year. And the reason why eclipses happen is because the sun, the moon, and the earth align in such an exact way that one of the bodies is no longer visible. So with the solar eclipse, the sun disappears, and with the lunar eclipse, the moon disappears, right? And that only happens because of these three bodies being perfectly aligned. In terms of the astrology, what happens is that the moon nodes, which are an intersection between the orbit of the Earth that goes around the moon that goes around the Earth, and the orbit of the Earth that goes around the sun, when they intersect those two orbits, that's what's called the moon nodes. And the moon nodes represent our soul's journey. And so eclipses are powerful full moons and new moons that upgrade us on a soul level, where we're getting a chance to upgrade our energy body, our physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual energy bodies to a higher vibrational place. And depending on where those moon nodes are, that can happen it takes place in different places in our own charts. It takes place in terms of different energies, different signs. Right now, the moon nodes are in Pisces and Virgo. And Pisces and Virgo are very service-oriented signs. Pisces is a very spiritual, emotional, and intuitive sign. Virgo is a very scientific, logical, rational sign that is about health, wellness, and well-being. And the two signs, because they're opposite each other, they need each other to create an integration and a balance between left brain and right brain, you could say. You know, the emotional, intuitive, and the rational, scientific. And so that's what we're dealing with currently with the eclipses, is finding that balance. However, you know, the next eclipse that will come in 2 weeks will be a solar eclipse in Aries, which will be the last eclipse of Aries in that polarity, because we just finished last year, we finished the Libra Aries polarity. And so this eclipse is the last eclipse that is going to finish up what we've been experiencing since 2023. 2023, 2024, we've been going through eclipses in Libra Aries. And Libra is the relationship sign, and Aries is the sign of courage and pioneership and adventure and going after our own goals. And so that next solar eclipse will be very much about, you know, stepping into who we are and our own path and what we want to, you know, accomplish in life and what we want to go after and walking our own path. And it's particularly connected to courage, because courage is something that we need in order to start something new. You know, Aries is the first sign of the zodiac. It's connected to springtime. And springtime is when we need the most courage, because that's when life starts to spring out from, you know, from winter, you know, like the seeds are starting to come out of the earth. And it requires courage for that to take place, because, you know, it might be still cold outside. There might still be a day of snow or a day of frost. And so we have to be strong. We have to be, you know, like resilient. We got to do this, right? So Aries is that sign that is just really resilient and really strong and really goes after what it wants and what it thinks it needs to do from a passionate place, from a place of like, yes, you know, this is right for me. Did this answer your question so far, Shanice, or is there more that I can say about the eclipses?
No, that's perfect. I mean, if you'd like to say more, feel free, but that was wonderful.
Okay. Okay, great. Is there anybody else that has more questions about the eclipses? Zach?
I actually don't have a question about the eclipses. I raised my hand preemptively. I do have a question, though.
Oh, that's totally fine. Yes, absolutely.
So it sounds like to me you have this extensive knowledge of astrology, 35 years working with who knows how many clients. And I'm a big picture kind of person. So I just kind of want to tap into you and see maybe if you see a big picture within the human journey, the soul's journey, rotating through all of these energies and balances and alignments or things like that. So is there any wisdom or gnosis that you've distilled on your own? Like, oh, look, this is universal, like universal properties, or like, what is the cosmos up to, perhaps, you know, anything deep like that in relationship to the soul's journey?
Yes. Thank you for that awesome question. That is a big question. Thank you so much, Zach. So I would say this, and I hope I understood the question correctly, but one thing that's currently going on is that we are finishing up a big phase, collectively speaking, in connection with the feminine intuitive energy. The last 15 years, we've had a lot of signs, a lot of outer planets in feminine signs. And so we were invited collectively to tap more into the feminine. We were all invited to work with the feminine, to connect to the feminine, to allow ourselves to tune inwards, to allow ourselves to not be so swayed by external circumstances, but to allow ourselves to ground within ourselves, to become more, spiritually aware, spiritually awake. There's been a lot of spiritual awakening that's been going on in the last 15 years. There's also been a lot of grounding in terms of our physical body, needing to ground ourselves physically. The physical body is also a feminine energy, because the physical is the earth, it's the planet, it's the mother earth, right? And so it is a feminine energy that wants us to connect to the physical in a healthy, beautiful way, where we're feeling the connection, where we're honoring it, where we're working with it, where we're changing how we've been ignoring the physical really for a long time. And so this in particular has been very strong since 2018. And I would also say during the pandemic, for example, there's been a lot of Capricorn energy, which is also a feminine energy, which was very much about us needing to take responsibility for our physical life, for how we live life on a physical plane, and how can we ground everything that we know and everything that we've been learning in terms of the spiritual energy, and in terms of the sort of like the understanding of that we are spirit beings. How can we ground that in reality? How can we ground that in not just in our physical body, but also in how we do things in life, right? And so this phase has been going on for a while. Now, this year, for the first time since 2003, there will be 3 outer planets that will shift into masculine signs. And what that means is that there's going to be a big energetic shift that will happen beginning on March 30th with Neptune moving into Aries. Then Saturn will move into Aries at the end of May. Then we have Uranus moving into Gemini in the beginning of July. And Pluto has already moved into Aquarius last November. So that's already in a masculine sign. So basically, these shifts are happening this year slowly. We're sort of in a transition this year. This year is a year of transition because we're moving into these masculine signs, and then we're going to move back into the feminine and then back into the masculine in 2026. But from 2026 on, we will have all 3 outer planets, which are very much connected to the collective journey, to our spiritual journey, to the the bigger picture in terms of what life is all about. These 3 planets will be in masculine signs for after 2026 for 7 years, and then Uranus and Neptune will be in there for even longer. So Neptune until 2038. Pluto until 2044. So we'll have long-term cycles that are basically starting this year and next year. And when these signs move into masculine signs, and I also want to say here, masculine sign doesn't mean masculine body, right? It doesn't mean gender. I'm not talking about gender here. I'm talking about masculine energy, which is fire and air, the fire and air element. And fire and air elements, they are all about creating vision, going after things. It's a very enthusiastic energy. It's mental and spiritual energy, but in a very outgoing. It's very outgoing. Masculine energy is very outgoing. It's much more extroverted. So we're learning to balance back into sort of like a healthy masculine. So taking what we've learned in terms of the introverted, the more feminine energy in terms of like knowing how to integrate femininity in our systems, in our lives, in our physical lives as well. And now bringing that more to into the world and allowing the world to see, you know, what we've learned, how we're working with the feminine energy and bringing that now out. So it's always about this feminine masculine balance, right? Everything, I would say everything in life is about balance. Everything in astrology is certainly about balance because it's about cycles, and every cycle has its way of balancing out other cycles. So so with this, you can also see that this is about balancing out the feminine and the masculine again. Maybe we've gone with the feminine, maybe we've tapped into the feminine to a degree for now that maybe needs a little bit more balancing into a healthy masculine, right? Healthy feminine, healthy masculine. Because there is such a thing as toxic feminine as well, right? Toxic feminine, toxic masculine. And it's in order to find a healthy feminine, we need to bring in a little bit more masculine. In order to find a healthy masculine, we have to bring in a little bit more of the feminine. So they need each other, right? They balance each other out. Does that answer your question, Zach, or is there more that I can say?
That did answer my question for the immediate future, and it was beautiful. So much of what you said is really resonating with me a lot, and a lot is having to do with like going out and showing the world all that we have learned and coming together. Yes. For me in particular, like in community, that's been a huge thing.
Community,
and there's this emergency feeling, the vibes in the collective.
Yeah.
And I'm just curious about the bigger picture, even more like this is like in the next, I don't know, 7 years or something.
Yeah.
Do you know, the other thing that resonated really strongly with me was you mentioned the 3 planets in the going out that have to do with the collective, the consciousness and the collective, yes. Which to me means the star family. Yes. Right. As we're going outward, like we're turning masculine, right? And we're going outward into more communal spaces also, yes. With our star family. So that's kind of what resonated with me on those. Is there, does it tell, what would you say about the collective consciousness? So we're going into this phase, to me, this sounds like it's very rapid cycling.
Yes.
Of shifting in between states, right?
Yes.
And in between energies.
Yes.
And what do you see as the outcome of this whole process of being able to shift back and forth quickly? Is there a point where perhaps we're coming into fullness and wholeness and we'll just be that way? So there's the oscillation between the two. Yes. Is non-apparent because it's so fast and it's so in harmony and so balanced as a collective. Like, yes. That's kind of like big picture. If you want to speak to that.
Yeah. Thank you for saying that. Well, I would say this. Obviously, the future is for us to create, right? So each of us needs to do their own part to get the collective to vibrate on this higher vibration, in this higher vibrational place. And the way the energies are moving right now is inviting us on an individual level to contribute, to be the change that we want to see in the world, right? And to bring that to our own networks, to our own groups of people, to our own communities. Each person is sort of like becoming the drop that goes into the water that starts the ripple. And so as we have more and more people that are willing to drop into the water and have that ripple out effect into the world, the more the collective can shift. And so it really depends on how many people are going to be on board. But one of the things that I said yesterday in my webinar was that it only takes 1%. So if you think about the world population, it only takes 1% of the world population in order for us to create a big enough ripple for the collective to change. Obviously, the more percentage we have, the better. If it's 5%, it's a huge ripple, right? But 1% is enough to create a shift. So I think that's important to keep in mind, because as human beings, we sometimes get frustrated and we get disenchanted with how the world is looking, or what other people are doing, or how other people are living their lives. And we want everybody to be on the same page. We want everybody to be as evolved as we are, or more, you know. And so it can get a little bit frustrating sometimes, but we have to remember that this is not required. It's not required for everybody to be on board, because if everybody on this planet had to be on board for the collective to shift, we would be in deep shit right now. And that's not the case. Okay. So I don't know if this answers your question, but basically,
it does. Thank you.
It does. Okay. I would also say that, you know, people will, you know, evolution is something that moves slowly, right? I mean, if you think back 100 years ago, for example, right? And you think where we were at in terms of humanity and the collective 100 years ago and where we are now, we're definitely in a very, very different place. And in a lot of ways, we're doing much, much better than we've done 100 years ago, right? 100 years ago was 1925, right? In 1925, this was between the first and the Second World War. This was right before the crash of the stock market. You know, like there were a lot of people were starving in the United States at that time. You know, there was a lot of hunger. So this is something that we're not experiencing anymore. You know, we're not experiencing things to such a degree where people are actually in total survival mode, right? I mean, yes, is it happening somewhere on this globe? Absolutely. There are people in survival mode, you know, somewhere in a third world country, or maybe even, you know, in the Ukraine, in Russia, in, you know, other places where people don't have a society that is able to think in terms of freedom, and in terms of allowing people to let them develop in their own way, right? But you know, in the Western world, right? In the Western world, we do not have people that starve to death. There are ways of people coming together, organizations, governments, people that support each other. And this is something that I think is going to become much more prevalent even in the future, is that we are going to be much more there for each other, and not so dependent on authority figures or governments to provide for us. I think that human beings are, and this is the Pluto and Aquarius shift that started in November already. You know, we're learning to become a community as countries, as the globe, you know, like being a human community rather than just being a community because we live in the same place, right? So it will become much larger in terms of that. Does that make sense?
It does. Thank you. Yeah.
You're welcome. Thanks for your question. Brian, did you have something you wanted to ask?
Yeah, I know this comes up a lot with people asking questions, or it's like a thing that people assume that they know. Can you talk a little bit about like retrogrades? Um,
Yes.
and because I think there's a lot of undue fear when
Yeah.
it comes about that, and you've kind of like showed me the way to not
Yes.
be afraid of those
Don't get
times.
away
Can
with
you
the
talk a little bit
retrograde.
about that?
Yes, absolutely. Great question, Brian. And that is true. Like people that know a little bit about astrology, they might know about retrogrades. And again, this is something that often gets represented as something that's scary or bad or challenging or not a good thing. And again, it's important to listen to your own heart as well, and to go, okay, does this pull me into my heart and into my space with myself, or is this pulling me into fear and pulling me into a place of like, you know, chaos and distraction, right? But one thing I would say about retrogrades is this. They are necessary because retrogrades allow us to process information and things in our lives that we have accumulated over time. So for example, tomorrow there will be a Mercury retrograde that will start tomorrow, right? And during the next 3 weeks, during that retrograde, we're getting a chance to process all the information and all the conversations and all the sharing that we've been doing over the last 3 months since the last Mercury retrograde. Also, everything that's come up in the last 3 weeks while Mercury was in its shadow phase, where it was in the same place where it will move through again during the retrograde phase. These are some things we might want to come back to and look over again and make sure that we're still on the same page where we need to be. So it's a realigning of external and internal, you could say, right? It's like bringing the masculine and the feminine back into alignment. So a retrograde phase is really a beautiful thing. It's really an important thing because it helps us process, it helps us reintegrate, it helps us realign ourselves with the outside world, internally, externally. So we need these phases. We need the retrograde phases. What's not being said very often when other people talk about retrograde phases is how important they are, how beneficial they are. They are very beneficial. So what you need to do during a retrograde phase is slow down a little bit, take your time with what you're experiencing, and rather than moving forward into new adventures, new information, new stuff happening, new conversations with people, new relationships, we want to go backward. We're going to look backward into our past, into everything that's been going on the last 3 months or the last 3 weeks, and go, okay, what's going on there that I still need to revisit, reevaluate, recommunicate? You know, what do I need to think about and process more about in connection to what's been going on? All of that. Does that make sense? Does that answer your question, Brian?
Yes, it does. Yes, it does. Thank you.
Okay. Was this helpful for everybody else as well, or do I need to clarify something? Yeah? Okay. Shanice, something else?
Yeah, no. I actually just want to say I love your answer, and I love the idea of kind of consistently looking back over 3-week or 3-month periods, because I've often heard of Earth called the Earth School, and this makes it seem more like, oh yeah, look at what's happened. What are your larger observations? What lessons do you need to carry forth? Anyway, I love your answer because it just made me look at the Earth School slightly differently. So it feels more like school that way.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Shanice. That's awesome. Okay. Anyone else who has anything that they want to share or ask? Sheila, I know you have a question. You're burning to ask it. I know it. You're still muted though. Maybe I can I unmute Sheila myself, or I don't know.
My thing says I'm unmuted.
There you are, and look how beautiful you are. You showered in the meantime.
Well, no, I showered before I got on. I just had wet hair and everything. So anyway, it dried while you were talking.
You're perfect.
So the one question I was thinking was kind of, it kind of came off of Zach's question, but it fits anywhere. So with the cycles of astrology and how we go through cycles, like with retrograde, we reflect and all of that. And you were talking about like 100 years ago. And so are there cycles? I always see us as humanity as walking up a mountain going in a spiral. So it looks like we're repeating the same thing, but we're at a higher level. Does that reflect in astrology?
Yes. So there are cycles that definitely repeat in astrology, and like you said, they repeat in different ways because the consciousness of humanity has grown and has evolved. So it's not ever gonna exactly repeat the same way as it was when the cycle happened the last time. However, what I would also say is that there are very rarely will you have exactly the same astrology happening with all planets as they are located, right? So for example, the way all planets are located right now, this is 10, we're talking about 10 planets, right? The last time all of these planets were in this exact same position was probably thousands of years ago. So that doesn't happen very often. Like those combinations, they don't come about very often. However, you will have cycles with like outer planets, for example. Like you can have a Pluto-Saturn cycle, for example, like what we had in 2000, right? In 2020 with the pandemic. That was a Pluto-Saturn cycle in Capricorn. And that cycle takes place, the Pluto-Saturn cycle takes place every 20 years or so, right? So the last time there was a Pluto-Saturn cycle was in the early 80s in Libra, when the AIDS crisis started. Okay. So you will see cycles like this, but the last time Pluto-Saturn was together in Capricorn was in the 1600s, so way longer ago. Okay, so that takes way longer. These two coming together in the same sign is a much bigger cycle. Okay, but the cycle between Pluto and Saturn coming together, that happens every 20 years, just in different signs. Mm-hmm. Okay, and these cycles, you know, when you have cycles with outer planets like Jupiter and Saturn cycles, they happen how often do they happen? So the last one we had in Taurus in 2000, and then the next one we had in 2021 in Aquarius. So that is also sort of like a 20-year cycle, right? 21 years. So there are these 20-year cycles, and then there are longer cycles as well, depending on how far away, how long these planets take to do this, to go around the sun, because some planets will take longer than others.
Has anyone looked? Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Has anyone like written or looked up in those longer cycles what happened?
Absolutely, yeah. No, people do that all the time when it comes to these longer cycles. I mean, you will find astrologers talking about the comparison of history all the time. For example, you know, like with Neptune moving into Aries, which is happening on March 30th. The last time this happened was in 1862, and that was the beginning of the American Revolution. And we also had it was very much about the freeing of the slaves at that time. What also happened in Russia in 1862 was the freeing of the serfs, which were also slaves. So you had you had something where people felt this need for freedom and for freeing other people and acknowledging that we're all, that there's an interconnectivity between all of us, right? And so this is something that, of course, is it going to be exactly the same this time around? No, because, most of us don't have slaves anymore. Although as a collective, you could say we feel like we're enslaved to something sometimes, right? We feel like we're enslaved to having to pay our rent. We feel like we're enslaved to having to pay our bills, to our job, to our, to people that depend on us, right? So sometimes there can be this feeling of enslavement. And so with Neptune in Aries, there could be a needing to free ourselves from that feeling of enslavement, collectively speaking. So you can see from that, right, Sheila, that there is a similar energy going on, a similar storyline. It just looks very differently because we don't have slaves, physical slaves anymore. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks.
Is that what you were talking about? I was just not sure. Did I answer that question correctly?
You did. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. Okay. So, yes, thank you very much.
Yeah, so astrologers will do this all the time, where they compare a cycle that's currently happening with a cycle that took place, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 100 years ago, 200 years ago, depending on what cycle it is and what we're talking about. Here's the thing that I want to say about that, though, is that when it comes to history, I find it a little bit dangerous sometimes to compare cycles that are currently going on to cycles that happened in the past, only because people will look at that history and go, oh my God, the American Revolution, we're going to be at war. We're going to, things will go to shit, people will kill each other. And that is not necessarily helpful, right? And especially it's not helpful because each of us is creating the future and each of us is creating our own reality. So it's very important that when we look back in history, that we take that with a grain of salt, and that we also see it only as like a pointer, not as a thing that's the truth, or that it will be repeated in that exact same way. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So anything else? Actually, I think we're coming to an end here, right? It's 12:58. There's one last thing I'd like to do before we end the session, which is, I want to say, for anybody who's watching this, whether you're here live or whether you're watching this as a recording, I have a gift for you. If you want to do a reading with me, I have a coupon code called Star Hour that you can put into my website when you buy a reading, and that will give you a 20% discount of any reading that you might want to pick or choose. So that's my gift to you in case you wanted to explore your birth chart, or if you wanted to explore anything else about yourself in connection with your chart. And then I would also love to just end the session by each of you just giving me a little bit of anything that you've learned from today. It could be a word, it could be a sentence, anything you'd like to share. Zach, would you like to start off?
Yes. As you were just talking, there was a lot that came through. We were talking about cycles and then just feelings or impressions of the cycles before. And to me, in relationship to the work that I've been doing, it talks to the dark lake, which is just basically the unprocessed trauma of the collective. So it's almost like we're moving through this kaleidoscope clock of energies, not necessarily time and cycles. And these energies, when the planets line up, that's the time to look back at what we didn't look back at before, maybe 100 years ago, for example. And the energy comes to the surface so it can be processed. And it doesn't, like you said, we're going to go fight and go to war, that kind of thing. It's just like, how can we feel this? How can we look at it? How can we make a different decision? So as you're saying that all came through, and it was really cool. So thank you.
I love that. Thanks for sharing that, Zach. That's powerful and perfect, because you're correct that we are definitely dealing with collective trauma, and we're definitely needing to heal a lot of that. And we're ready to heal that, because up until now, we were not able to do that healing work on a collective level. So thank you for pointing that out. We're definitely ready to do that work. Yes. Shanice, what have you learned?
I sort of gleaned from what you said a lot, sort of that there are lots of facts, there's a lot of information, but how you look at it is going to be very important. Especially like you said, there's different astrologers and they're not, they're sharing things through their own filter. And especially looking back to the past, if you're looking at things that happened historically, it's like, although this happened 200 years ago on the same date, like what would the archetype, energy be of this situation? And how could I look at it as if I were to take the point of view that everything here is to assist me and help me remember who I am. So that is my takeaway.
Perfect. Oh my God. Love it. Yes, that is exactly it. Yes. Couldn't have said it better. Beautiful. Thanks, Shanice, for sharing that. Brian, anything you've learned today?
Just that you're so insightful when it comes to this stuff. I always feel more grounded and more comfortable about what astrology is telling me, and that every time you talk about this stuff, it's like in perfect alignment with energetically where I'm already at, right?
Yes.
And getting more information about what does this mean? Like what's going on? I'm feeling like I need to do this or that, and I'm just trusting my intuition and my heart. And then you say, well, this is what's going on in the universe. And I go, oh, okay, well, there you go. Right. And then there's like additional insights to help me navigate that. So this has been great. This is
perfect. Love it. Thanks, Brian. Thanks for sharing it. Carrie, anything you'd like to share?
I think it was super insightful, when you answered my first question, but I also think that discussing retrogrades and really taking the fear out of those and looking at it in more of a positive way, I think that was something that I think generally we don't hear enough of. So I appreciated that.
You're so welcome. Thanks for sharing that. Perfect. Sheila, is there anything you'd like to share?
Well, I really enjoyed everything that you said. And I especially liked your description of the years and the phases that we're coming out of and going into with a male and female balance, or divine feminine and masculine balance. So yes. I really enjoyed that. And I agree also. I love the way you approach astrology. I think it's like you're one of the healthiest astrologers I've ever met.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
And I also love how you described retrograde, because a lot of times people will come to me and like, oh, it's in retrograde. And I always try to like shift the understanding of it, but I never had such clear words as slow down and take a look at it. So I'm going to borrow that. I will give you credit. And I think that's an amazing way to look at retrograde.
Thank you. Yes, Sheila, definitely use whatever I share, with anybody who has questions about it. Yeah, definitely use it. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Sheila. All right. Thanks for everybody for being here today. So shall we take another deep breath together and close the session? All right. Beautiful. Thank you so much for being here with me today. I really appreciate all of you. Have a fantastic rest of your day. Have a fantastic weekend. Have a fantastic Mercury retrograde. Have a fantastic eclipse season. Woohoo! Bye-bye.